5 of the most consequential thinkers in human history reached the same conclusion independently, separated by centuries and civilizations, and not one of them softened it. The person who builds their power on being liked will eventually be destroyed by it. Sun Tzu, the Chinese general writing The Art of War in 500 BC, Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine diplomat who wrote The Prince in 1513, Carl Jung, the Swiss founder of analytical psychology in the early 1900s, neuroscientists with brain imaging machines today studying the amygdala and reward pathways, and Robert Greene, whose 48 laws of power got banned in American prisons for being considered too dangerous. All of them arrived at the same place. Today we go through all of it in 3 acts, starting with why the people-pleasing trap exists inside your brain before we ever talk about how to get out of it. Part 1. Why we get trapped. Carl Jung called it the persona, a word borrowed from the Latin for mask, and his definition of it was precise: a construct designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. That mask gets built in childhood, shaped by a simple feedback loop. Which version of you earns warmth, and which version earns withdrawal? The approved of parts become the face you show the world. Everything else gets pushed down into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow holds what you were trained to hide: the assertiveness, the anger, the drive for power, the comfort with conflict, the willingness to say no and mean it. All of it sealed off, so the approval kept coming. And here's the thing, most people never hear about it. The shadow is not purely destructive. Jung was explicit on this point. It contains potent, creative, and powerful capabilities that were condemned not out of care, but out of envy, fear, ignorance, or jealousy. The capacities you need to actually operate with power in the world are not missing from you. They got locked away early in life, and most people spend decades performing around that locked door instead of opening it. Leave the shadow unintegrated, and Jung's warning applies. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. The person who never reclaims those capacities doesn't find peace, they leak. Passive aggression, resentment, performances of niceness that cost everything internally while earning nothing externally. The approval seeker is not a gentle soul navigating a hard world. They are a person at war with themselves, and the war never stops. Jung put the frame on the whole thing in one line: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. Playing smart instead of nice is disagreeable, and that is exactly why most people never get there. Jung gave us the psychological origin. What the neuroscience gives us is the mechanism that keeps the pattern locked in place, and once you see it, the approval trap stops looking like a character flaw and starts looking like a wiring problem. Receiving approval, a smile, a compliment, a positive response from someone whose opinion matters to you, triggers a dopamine release in the brain, the same neurotransmitter released by food, exercise, and attraction, and it is deeply reinforcing by design. On the other side of that equation, rejection and social exclusion activate brain regions that overlap with those processing physical pain, particularly in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is not a metaphor. The brain genuinely handles being left out in some of the same circuits it uses for being hurt. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. For most of human history, exclusion from the group meant death, and the brain evolved accordingly. The problem is that the environment changed and the brain did not. Complex professional and social environments now reward exactly the behaviors that the approval-wired brain punishes: holding a position people disagree with, saying no when it matters, making a call that generates short-term friction in exchange for long-term respect. Every time the brain registers that friction as threat and the person backs down to calm it, the pattern gets reinforced, and social media has pushed this into overdrive, with research showing that likes and positive responses activate the same reward circuitry as other dopamine triggers, creating variable reward schedules that mirror addiction patterns. And the stronger the brain reacts to that approval, the more urgently it seeks more of it. These platforms were not designed to be neutral. They are approval dispensing systems, and they are conditioning millions of people in real time. Old software, new world, and knowing that is where the ability to change it starts. Robert Greene spent years researching the 48 Laws of Power, first published in 1998, and the numbers around that book tell their own story. Over 1.2 million copies sold in the United States alone, translated into 24 languages, cited by Jay-Z, Will Smith, and Michael Jackson, who reportedly filled his copy with margin notes, and banned outright by several American prisons. The LA Times described Greene as a cult hero across the hip-hop world, Hollywood, and prison libraries simultaneously, which is an unusual combination and not an accidental one. The book resonated across groups with almost nothing else in common because it named a system people already sensed was operating around them. Greene identified the core problem directly. Everything must appear civilized, decent, democratic, and fair. But if we play by those rules too strictly, we are crushed by those around us who are not so foolish. His later book, The Laws of Human Nature, made the argument that connects most directly to Jung. We tend to admire successful people's creativity and work ethic while subtracting their darker qualities, whereas it may be these darker qualities and their integration that helped them toward their success. You pay a greater price by always being so nice and deferential than you would by showing more of your shadow. The word integration is not accidental there. Greene is describing the same move Jung described, the reclamation of what got locked away, as a condition for operating effectively, rather than just performing agreeableness. Greene also flags something most people never anticipate. Envy, he writes, occurs most commonly and painfully among friends, and people who carry envy are often motivated to attach themselves to the person they envy. Once inside that friendship, they learn weak points, and they learn them precisely because the approval seeker is open, accessible, and eager to be liked. You will inevitably find people who are drawn to those who are successful or powerful, not out of admiration, but out of secret envy. They find a way to attach themselves as friends or assistants. The approval you work hard to generate is not always what it looks like, and some of the people liking you most are best positioned to use what they know. This dynamic is what psychologists call Machiavellian behavior, using charm and manipulation to achieve personal goals, and it's more common than most people-pleasing individuals realize. Part 2. What the Trap Costs You. Niccolò Machiavelli was born May 3rd, 1469, in Florence, and spent 14 years as a diplomat, watching the most powerful figures in Europe exercise and lose power up close. Louis XII of France, Pope Julius II, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, and Cesare Borgia, a prince of the Papal States whose methods left a permanent mark on everything Machiavelli later wrote. When Borgia lured his enemies to the city of Senigallia and had them strangled, Machiavelli was present, and afterward he sat down with Borgia and discussed it. When the Medici family returned to power in Florence in 1512, Machiavelli lost everything he had built over 14 years. A year later came the arrest, the false accusation of conspiracy, 3 weeks of imprisonment, and torture by the strappado, suspended by his bound arms from behind until his shoulders dislocated. Exile followed. And then, in the quiet of Sant'Andrea, with no career and no prospects, he picked up a pen. By December 10th, 1513, he confirmed to his friend Francesco Vettori in writing that he was deep into the manuscript we now call The Prince. Machiavelli died June 21th, 1527, at 58 years old, and the book came out in 1532, 5 years after he was gone. Pope Clement VIII banned it immediately, not because it was wrong, but because it was accurate. Before Machiavelli, an entire literary genre existed called the Mirror for Princes, books written specifically for rulers, every one of them delivering the same advice: be virtuous, be generous, be trustworthy, and your people will love you and your rule will hold. That is also the approval seeker's complete operating philosophy applied to individual life. Be agreeable, make people feel good, never make anyone uncomfortable, and your position will be secure. Machiavelli's response to that tradition, written in chapter 15, cuts it off at the root. There is so much difference between the way people should act and the way they do act, that any prince who tries to do what he should will ruin himself, and something which looks like virtue, if followed, would be his ruin, whilst something else which looks like vice, yet followed, brings him security and prosperity. That is the broken map, the one handed to most people early in life, the one that describes how a perfect world would work, rather than the one they are actually navigating. Greene says the same thing 5 centuries later, with different words. 2 men, the same map, the same cliff. Chapter 17 of The Prince is the most quoted chapter in the book and the most misunderstood. So let's go through it properly. Machiavelli opens with the question directly: is it better to be loved or feared? Ideally both, he says, but when a choice is forced, anyone compelled to choose will find greater security in being feared than in being loved. The reasoning behind that is where the real substance lives. Love, in the social and political sense he is describing, is a feeling someone else chooses to have about you. It lives inside them, it follows their self-interest, and it gets abandoned the moment abandoning it becomes convenient. Men have less hesitation in offending someone who is beloved, he writes, because love is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. Fear operates on a different mechanism entirely, one that does not depend on anyone's goodwill and does not shift with mood or circumstance. None of that is an endorsement of cruelty. Machiavelli was explicit about this, because hatred is where conspiracy lives, and what you want is to be respected, understood to carry consequences, without being hated. Those two things are fully compatible. And then comes the sentence the entire framework rests on. Men love as they themselves determine, but fear as their ruler determines. A wise prince must rely upon what he and not others can control. Chasing approval means handing the lever of your own stability to people who will pull it whenever it serves them. Commanding respect means the control stays with you, which is the only place it was ever safe. Cesare Borgia was Machiavelli's primary model in chapter 7, and his most instructive move was not a battle, but a piece of perception management. To pacify a fractious region called the Romagna, Borgia sent his enforcer, Ramiro de Orco, in to establish order by any means necessary. Ramiro was brutal and effective, and the people came to despise him for it. When Ramiro had served his purpose and his methods had become a liability, Borgia had him killed and displayed his body in the public square, cut in two, with a piece of wood and a bloody knife placed beside him. The people were, in Machiavelli's words, at the same time satisfied and stupefied. Borgia had outsourced the dirty work, absorbed none of the hatred, and then publicly executed the man responsible, demonstrating both justice and power in a single act. His downfall came later from one misjudgment about Pope Julius II, years of precise strategy unraveled by a single moment of poor positioning, which is Machiavelli's point. External fortune cannot substitute for internal foundation. Agathocles of Syracuse, born in 361 BC to a potter, rose through the military ranks of the city until one morning he assembled the Senate and the wealthiest citizens of Syracuse and had them all killed, every political rival gone before midday. He held power after that. Machiavelli's verdict on him was precise and unsparing. These modes can enable one to acquire empire, but not glory. Power without respect is a position permanently on the edge of the next revolt, and Agathocles had control without ever having standing. Savonarola, a Dominican friar who held Florence through charisma and moral authority alone, is the warning Machiavelli places in Chapter 6. When the crowd turned on him, there was nothing underneath his position. No structural power, no independent resources, nothing but an audience that had stopped believing. All armed prophets have conquered, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed, Machiavelli writes. And whilst it is easy to persuade the people, it is difficult to fix them in that persuasion. Savonarola built everything on continued approval, and the moment that approval shifted, everything went with it. Part 3. How to play differently. Chapter 18 gives Machiavelli's core operating instruction, and it centers on two animals. The lion represents ferocity and the capacity to project power through strength. The fox represents intelligence and perception management, the ability to detect traps before stepping into them. Those who rely simply on the lion do not understand what they are about, he writes, because pure force without intelligence is a person walking into a snare in broad daylight. Strength without the vision to see what is actually set up around them. This balance of virtue, Machiavelli's term for adaptable excellence, and strategic thinking, was his answer to the unpredictability of fortuna. Sun Tzu wrote the same thing 2,000 years earlier, and an entire civilization away, working from pure observation rather than Florentine political theory, and he arrived at the identical conclusion. His most famous principle, all warfare, is based on deception. When we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. That is Machiavelli's Chapter 18 in a different voice, from a different era, on a different continent. Control what people perceive. Never let the surface accurately represent the depth. And then Sun Tzu adds the line that connects most directly to the approval problem. Be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby, you can be the director of the opponent's fate. The approval seeker is the opposite of formless. They broadcast their needs constantly, and every person around them with a strategic mind reads that broadcast and adjusts accordingly. Here is the full system. All 5 sources, one framework. Reclaim the shadow first, because the assertiveness and the boundary setting and the willingness to be disliked when disliked is the honest response. All of that is locked in the shadow, not absent from you. Integrating it is not becoming a worse person. It is becoming a complete one, and it is the psychological foundation without which nothing else on this list works properly. Stop managing what you cannot control, because you cannot make someone like you, and the energy spent trying is energy taken from building the structures, consequences, and incentives that actually shape how people behave toward you. Manage structures, not feelings. Be the fox before you need the lion. Read the room. Understand the subtext. Know what is actually happening beneath the surface of every interaction before deciding how to engage with it. Most people pour everything into projecting the lion and give nothing to the fox, and they walk into traps that a little attention would have revealed. Control what people see, because people act on what they perceive, not on your internal reality. And the person who manages their image controls the narrative others are constructing about who they are and what the cost of crossing them might be. Delegate the injuries and retain the credit, because the person who publicly owns every difficult decision absorbs the hatred that comes with it. And over time, that hatred accumulates and attaches permanently. Be intentional about what you put your name on. Deliver painful things all at once, and give good things slowly, because a single clean delivery stings once, while ongoing bad news stings repeatedly. And a benefit experienced in installments lasts longer in someone's memory than the same benefit received all at once. Build internal resources rather than just social standing, because Savonarola is the warning. Everything on the crowd's goodwill, nothing underneath. And when the crowd moved, so did everything he had: skills, options, genuine leverage. These hold when sentiment shifts. Social capital is a surface, not a foundation. 2,500 years of recorded thought. 5 thinkers working from observation rather than ideology, and not one of them landed anywhere different. Sun Tzu in 500 BC. Be formless. Manage appearances. Win without the fight. Machiavelli in 1513. The approval seeker is a prophet without arms. Men love as they determine, fear as you determine, and a wise person builds only on what they control. Jung in the early 1900s. The trap starts in childhood. The shadow holds what you need, and making the darkness conscious is disagreeable, which is precisely why most people never do it. Neuroscientists today. Rejection runs through pain pathways, approval runs through dopamine. The loop is biological and trained and amplified by every platform built to keep you scrolling. And it is running in almost everyone against almost everyone's long-term interest. Greene. You pay a greater price by always being deferential than you would by showing more of your shadow. The envy hiding behind friendship is real, and the fully legible person is the most vulnerable person in any room. None of this is an argument for cruelty, or coldness, or performing hostility as a substitute for genuine strength. What it is an argument for being awake, for understanding the actual game being played rather than operating from a map written for a world that does not exist. Nice people don't lose because the world is unfair. They lose because they are playing by rules only they are following, on a map that does not match the territory, powered by a biological loop that rewards the behavior quietly costing them everything. Play smart instead.